Hello, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us here in the Pew Hall Okora, and thank you to those who are tuning into our live stream tonight. My name is Becca Burton, and I'm a lecturer and program coordinator for the University of Florida Gulf Scholars Program, which is housed right here in the Bob Graham Center for Public Service. For those of you who are new to the center, if it's your first time joining us, it was founded by former U.S. Senator and Florida Governor Bob Graham. And the mission of the center is really to create a community of students, scholars, and citizens committed to revitalizing civic culture in Florida and in the nation. We also like to consider ourselves the civic engagement hub on UF's campus. The Graham Center is home to the International Studies major and Public Service minor, and we coordinate Washington, Tallahassee, and City of Gainesville internship programs for students who are looking to gain experience in public service. We also host a variety of public programs just like this one. UF Gulf Scholars is one of our center's newest programs. We are one of about 30 schools from Texas to Florida to have a Gulf Scholars program. These programs are funded by criminal settlement funds from the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill and administered by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And the Gulf region really is an ideal place to study some of today's most complex challenges. We don't really have to go far to see things like climate change, sea level rise, public health disparities play out in real time. And our students from Gulf communities bring really important lived experiences and knowledge to this work. This program really offers a way to explore global challenges through a local lens, connecting what's happening here to what's happening around the world. So through Gulf-focused coursework, experiential learning, and public programs like this one, Gulf Scholars brings together students, faculty, and community partners to take on the Gulf's biggest challenges, and we prepare students to lead with purpose in the places they call home. As Governor and Senator, Bob Graham sought to understand the complex relationships between Florida's climate, landscape, waterways, and marine life. He led efforts to restore the Everglades, advocated for manatees, and later served as the co-chair of President Obama's National Commission on the BP Deepwater oil spill. We're honored to continue his legacy through this program, through Gulf Scholars, especially as we celebrate the center's 20th anniversary. Tonight marks the third event in our Gulf, Our Future series, which explores pressing challenges facing Gulf communities and the innovative solutions emerging to address them. Before we begin, I would like to thank a few people who made tonight possible. First, we have our graduate assistant, Radhika Subramanian. Thank you, Radhika. Radhika has really been involved in shaping Gulf Scholars from the very beginning, even before I was hired. And then Surya Dodia, who is not here tonight, who is our public programs student assistant, who helped put this together as well. Thank you both for your incredible work putting this event together. A few housekeeping notes for those of you in the audience. Our restrooms are behind the stage. Following the talk, we'll have a audience Q&A. So if you're in the audience, just raise your hand and one of our student fellows will bring you a mic. We do ask that you ask your questions into the mic so people at home on the live stream can hear. And if you're joining us online, feel free to put your questions in the chat and we'll get to those as well. So to kick things off, we're gonna start with a few quick icebreaker questions. So let's see if this clicker works. For those of you in the audience, you can pull out your phones and go to menti.com in your browser. You don't have to download an app or anything. And the code is 91125165. For those of you online, it should be in the chat also. All right, our first question. When you think of the Gulf, what's the first word or feeling that comes to mind? Flood, ocean, hurricane, kayaking, beauty, water. So we seem to have a nautical theme going on here, not surprisingly. All right, we're gonna go to the next oh, still a few more coming in. Bay, hurricane, vacation, biodiversity, mangroves, resilience. Awesome. I'm going to go ahead to the next one. Where does your connection to the Gulf feel strongest? So a lot of votes for natural beauty and wildlife that make it unique. Some people are saying in the work to protect and restore it, and the people and communities who call it home. And last one, pertinent to this talk. How hopeful are you about Florida's economic future, environmental future, and the ability to bounce back after disasters? It's a slider. All right, we seem to be more hopeful than not, which is good. I think that's a great lead-in to tonight's talk, which I'm certain will leave you feeling even more hopeful. I'm thrilled to welcome our speaker, Dr. Shalini Vajjhala. Dr. Vajjhala is the Executive Director of Pre-Collective and a nationally recognized expert in infrastructure and climate resilience with over 15 years of experience designing, funding, and financing community-centered resilient infrastructure solutions. She founded and led Refocus Partners and co-founded The Atlas, an online platform for local government collaboration and innovation. Previously, she served in the Obama administration at both the US EPA and the White House Council on Environmental Quality. She holds a bachelor's in architecture and a PhD in engineering and public policy from Carnegie Mellon University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Shalini Vajjhala.
Thank you, Becca, and thank you to the Bob Graham Center for having me. I am delighted to be here, and I am hopeful about all three of the things in that last slide, and I'll tell you why. It's because what I do is tackle all three of those challenges together. How we deal with our environment, our economy, and how we look to our future. So our team at Pre-Collective is a national nonprofit, and I want to make sure these slides advance. And we work on all that early messy stuff that you have to do with communities, with local governments, with state agencies to build what you need next instead of just putting Band-Aids on what you have. The wonky term for that is pre-development. And so at Pre-Collective, when we do our work well, success is often something that doesn't happen. The kinds of things that you see on this slide are the images of what's avoided. So that's a fantastic outcome, except if, for example, you're in government, because in the first year, everybody remembers the storm that hit in the community that wasn't flooded. So you get a lot of kudos. In the second year, well, nothing happened, so your budget goes away. And in the third year, your staff go away. So how we think about designing for resilience is just inextricably connected to how we pay for resilience and how we value it. So how we think about that at Pre-Collective, I have now set off a laser pointer. Let me see if I can do this. There we go. How we think about this at Pre-Collective is in three building blocks that make up the whole early messy part of designing for resilience. And those three building blocks are vision, capacity, and money. So these three are actually most easily recognized in their absence. So all of you know a world where if you have vision and capacity and no money, do you know what we get? I'm an architect, we get gorgeous drawings. Nothing gets built. The other two are a little more subtle. If you have vision and money and no capacity, So capacity means enough warm bodies in the right places at the right times with the right skills. If you have vision and money and no capacity, this is where we tend to blame government for slow and uneven implementation. What we've found to deliver successful projects, to get real things built on the ground, you have to have all three. And if you only have capacity and money and no vision, what we get is business as usual, which is also a failure of imagination. So we move all these things forward together. And how we do this work and what success looks like to us comes in three simple words. Success looks like money, shovels, and stories. So I'm going to tell you 4 stories from our work. And I'm going to share these some that are long complete and some that are works in progress. And then I'm going to share 4 lessons that we've learned through the process that I hope all of you will also carry forward, because all of us are going to be resilience practitioners. So the 4 stories I'm going to share are going to be about flooding, insurance, housing, and transportation. Let me start with flooding. The pictures that you see on the slide here are from the city of Hoboken. Let me see a show of hands from in the room. How many folks have ever been to Hoboken? Okay, I see a few good folks. Hoboken is a tiny city across the river from Manhattan. So across from New York City in New Jersey. It is a single square mile. And before Hurricane Sandy hit in 2012, it was almost entirely paved and shaped like a bowl. So when the hurricane rolled through, Hoboken filled up like a bathtub. And at points had 12 feet of standing water. People were trapped in second-story apartments for extended periods of time. And the city was well and truly devastated. So our team came into Hoboken with support from the Rockefeller Foundation before the floodwaters had even fully receded. And what we talked to the city about was that alignment of vision, capacity, and funding. We said, starting with the vision, what do you all need? And they looked at us like we were crazy and pointed to the cars floating down the streets and said, we need pumps for flooding. I said, yes, and what else? And it took many tries of asking the same question. This is incredibly important. The first answer is never the whole answer when you do this work. And so the folks in Hoboken answered the question again and said, well, you know what, we don't have enough green space, and we have real issues with parking, as you can see, with cars floating down the street. So we worked with them and we said, well, you need a flood solution, and you need all these other things. What if we were able to design, let's just think about it, a parking garage that functions like a bathtub on purpose? You have cars floating down your streets anyway? Let's think about this, because the rest of the time when it's dry, what if your parking fees could pay for flood protection? So instead of looking in their wallets to see how much they could afford, we said, well, what if you zoom out a little bit and let's figure out a bigger vision? So we worked with the city over the course of about 1.5 years, and we helped them take this early concept, the thing on the top right, and set in motion what is now a $100 million crown jewel of a resilience park. They had 6 acres of contaminated land behind chain link fence, and this concept helped them acquire the land, clean up the site, and create an absolutely gorgeous park that now is a citywide bathtub. They didn't do it with the parking garage. They did it with cisterns and this layer cake of infrastructure where there is this absolutely beautiful community asset now. This is what it looks like when we get this work right. But why is it hard to pay for? Well, in 2023, just a month and a half or so after Hoboken did the ribbon cutting for this park, they had a massive storm roll through the New York and New Jersey area. And the New York Times sent out reporters and photographers to Hoboken because that's always where the most photogenic flooding was. Well, it turns out the city didn't flood. And the Times wrote the story about the flood that didn't happen. This is what it looks like when we get this work right. It's also why it's incredibly important to tell the story of what it looks like before you even start, because otherwise you never get the money to do the work. So I'm going to switch now and share a second story that builds right on top of this project, because about 2.5 years into the work with Hoboken, we had done some early designs, we had done the engineering and the modeling with partners, and we realized, if they built this, we're creating a lot of private benefits with public money, taxpayer dollars, from a project that protects a hospital, a whole set of buildings, and creates insurance value. So my colleague Jamie and I started this work shortly on the back of doing that bathtub sketch, the parking garage sketch. And we said, wait a second, if we are thinking about this right, these projects are hard to pay for. Why can't we capture some of the value from the insurance savings, just like we do for energy efficiency? So you think about it, you have a bill, you put in a more efficient light bulb, you create a savings, and that can help you pay for the improvement. We didn't have a way to do that for insurance. We were just watching the value kind of spread out. And so we started this work and we asked this question, why isn't this happening? And it turns out we have a right hand and a left hand problem. People who buy insurance and manage risk often don't have any idea what's happening with people who build projects to make communities more resilient. There are a lot of reasons for that, but it's also the same reason why I'm so excited to be here with the Gulf Scholars Program and the Graham Center, because we need people who speak across silos so that we can actually find opportunities to get more value for communities, for our taxpayer dollars. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to walk you through what my colleague and I created as a new insurance product, which was not something I ever set out to do. Becca mentioned at the top of this talk that I'm an architect, so I never ever, in my wildest imagination, expected to be designing financial instruments. And what happened was we walked into this financial instrument by going through the door of how to solve a problem for real people in a real place. So we said, okay, this bathtub, this project in Hoboken, this gorgeous resilience park, how does that happen? Well, a city authority decides they're going to build a project. And so they dedicate money to it, and they design the project, and they go ahead and do it. Well, the other hand of that city, the right hand and the left hand, is buying insurance. And those insurance costs in most places are going up and up and up and up. And that's true for individuals, from homeowners, and it's true for cities. Well, there are different kinds of insurance. So the way I think about this is I want you to think about health insurance and life insurance, right? You would never trade one for the other. Life insurance is great. It has one key problem, which is that you have to die to get the money. So it's not the thing you want as your first line of defense. Cities have the same kind of opportunity, and states have the same kind of opportunity. There's property insurance, and then there's something called catastrophe insurance in the form of catastrophe bonds. I want you all to think about a catastrophe bond like a life insurance policy. It only pays out if something terrible happens. You get hit by the Cat 4 storm. The people doing these two things are making totally separate decisions. So we said, okay, with a project like the Hoboken project, how do you make sure that you actually get a discount on your insurance? So what does that look like? Well, if you think about it like life insurance, insurers know that if you quit smoking, you're at lower risk. So your rates go down. And that works because they have information. They have data to say how much that is worth. If you called your life insurer and said, I joined a gym, they would say, good job. And nothing would change about your rates because they have no way of knowing how much that actually changes your health outcomes. Catastrophe bonds are the same kind of thing. Some resilience projects work really well. We know exactly how much they reduce your risk. Others don't. But public entities should have the ability to do this and capture this value in the same way we think about energy efficiency or savings on our bills. So we created a way to do that by tweaking existing catastrophe bonds and saying, if you reduce risk, and you can model those risks. So we put the Hoboken project and a few others, into insurance industry catastrophe models. And we said, how much does this reduce your risk? Well, it turned out at the time we were doing this, flood modeling didn't do a great job with these projects. So we watched the flood models run and pixels of ocean fill in behind our little bathtub. What was amazing, though, is just this year, I got a note from folks in North Carolina who said, hey, we were following your work on flooding, and we used it to manage wind risk in North Carolina. So the state insurance company, so like Florida Citizens, the state insurance company for North Carolina is the North Carolina Insurance Underwriting Association. And they took this early work and they treated it, we treat all of our work like a relay race. And so these folks took the baton and ran past our wildest expectations. This spring, they issued a $600 million first ever resilience bond that saved the state money on its reinsurance and now helps them fund their programs for home resilience retrofits. So think long nails for roofs, protection from wind and storm risk. This is what it looks like when our work is successful. Pre-Collective, we are a nonprofit on purpose because we want to set this kind of work in motion and do the first two, the first three to show how it works, and open up, in this case, what is a multi-billion-dollar insurance market for rewarding resilience. So you can see how these things naturally build on one another. We went from this tiny bathtub to now this insurance instrument. I'm going to take this in a different direction and talk about how we make the connection to housing. So our team works with a whole range of partners all across the US. We will work with anybody who is willing to tackle some of the hardest challenges. So I describe our portfolio as being essentially a collection of things that are everybody's problem and no one's job. This is where the magic happens, right? Because you don't have someone who is arguing for a narrow solution. You're kind of in between a lot of folks who all have common interest, but don't necessarily have any glue that helps them see that common interest or realize it. So for this story, I'm going to share an example from Montgomery County, Maryland. And before I walk to a specific example, I want to just level set about what is affordable housing. Affordable housing is housing. It's quality places for people to live and thrive. Those places are threatened. And they're threatened in Montgomery County, Maryland, in the same way they are here in Gainesville, with a lot of rainfall and storm-related flooding. So what does this look like in practice? Well, it looks like people who are dealing with chronic basement flooding or home repairs. It looks like people who are suffering and living with mold when they can't do those repairs or can't afford them. What it looks like for an affordable housing developer is a constant exercise in triage, always chasing for that next Band-Aid. Where is the mold? Where is the flooding? Where is the roof repair? And it's a really hard treadmill to get off. And so what we said, working with the Montgomery County Green Bank, which has done incredible work financing solar, energy efficiency, and building retrofits all across the county, they wanted to start a water and resilience program. How do we do what we're doing for energy, for water and resilience? Well, we worked with them over the last year. This is a very, very new program to create a new financial product. So again, now I have walked my way from architecture and engineering into policy and politics and finance. And so I hope that gives you all a flavor for what following these problems does. You will very quickly tap dance outside of your skill sets and your job descriptions and end up doing things like this, where you get to work with phenomenal people. So the team at the Montgomery County Green Bank are extraordinary. And over the last year, we've worked together to create a new type of dedicated fund to help housing developers get off this treadmill of constant repairs. And so affordable housing developers are often nonprofits that build and manage properties that they rent to folks at below market rates. And so they are operating on very, very thin budgets and trying to make the most at every dollar. And what they tend to do is they will chase grants to try to do the nice to have stuff instead of the urgently needed stuff. We worked to listen really hard to those developers and slow down the treadmill so they could do something different. We said, this is going to sound strange to you all, but a loan might be cheaper than a grant. I want you to think about this. If you're thinking about a house and you were looking to get a little bit of money here and there and you were doing building repairs, little bits at a time, do you guys think that would be more expensive or less expensive than doing it all at once? More expensive? Yeah, it is. So it's counterintuitive that financing might actually be cheaper than so-called free money when you are looking to do improvements in a public entity, in a housing development ecosystem. So what we did is we combined features of a loan with a line of credit. So if you think about a line of credit, it gives you money up front to do the things that you need to do, and that actually could help create savings for you over time. So this made financing less scary for all the folks who are really trying to make the most of every dollar. What's super exciting about this is those first two examples of affordable housing I showed a few slides ago are from developers in Montgomery County who are the first to close loans with this product, which just happened this month. And there is a pipeline of $50 million worth of projects already building up. And we're hoping to take this approach national. This is what it looks like to go from projects to programs to systems change. And when we get it right, it doesn't ever stay neatly in one discipline. This isn't stuff that any single finance professional or economist or architect could solve. It really took a lot of skills from a lot of different disciplines. So part of why I'm sharing these stories with you all is to show in practice that we all hope for these kinds of outcomes, but hope is really this kind of uncomfortable muscle that you have to flex in collaboration. So everything we do at Pre-Collective is collective. And it's where we've also seen the greatest progress on things like resilience, on housing, on insurance, on managing flood risk. So how do we get to these kinds of things? My last story that I'm going to share with you is a work in progress, and it's focused on the transportation sector. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of a hypothetical for how to think about these projects and how you all might want to think about this work in your own careers as you go out and take what you've learned here at UF and at the center into the wider world. One of the things we do at Pre-Collective is we ask a lot of questions, and we wait for the answers. So I think I mentioned in Hoboken, it's never the first answer that helps you get there. So one of the questions we ask is, who loses money if we don't do anything about this problem? So who loses money? So I want you to think about what the answers to that question might be. Up on the slide, you see an example of what heat does to transportation systems. These are examples from all around the world. I think I'm within my engineering degree to say that the technical term for what happens to train systems when it's hot out is that they melt. It's an oversimplification, but it drives a lot of decision making within transit systems and freight systems. And what folks do, so I want you to think back again to that risk manager who doesn't quite see what the project person is doing. What the risk manager is doing is trying to prevent derailments. And so a lot of times what that means in practice is you're running fewer trains and you're running them more slowly. Who's losing money? You are. That is your primary service. So it shows up on your balance sheet. There's another question that we ask that goes directly with this, and it's who suffers when we don't get this right? So who loses money and who suffers? Well, it turns out who suffers are people who are waiting for trains longer on the hottest days of the year. That's my grandmother. That's a worker who's now late for work 3, 4, 5 days in a row and might lose their jobs. You are never looking to finance a project or fund a project on the backs of the people who are suffering. And I think this is a trap we fall into very easily when we're thinking about resilience, when we're thinking about infrastructure, even when we're thinking about economic growth. What we do is we look for the separate answers to these questions, and we look for a solution that serves both, whoever's losing money and who's suffering. So what does that look like in practice? In our work, it looks like walking from needs to ideas to projects, which is deceptively simple. So I want you to think again about that transit system operator, right? They have a real problem. Their infrastructure is overheating. It might be failing in the heat, it might be melting. That was very glib. But they might have a lot of options, a lot of engineering solutions for retrofitting their system, repairing tracks, new materials, and that would be fantastic resilience investment. Generally, it takes a decade, and it costs in the billions of dollars. So now I want you to think about who's left outside in that decade for longer and longer and longer, while the system gets weaker and weaker and weaker. So then you have the who's suffering. And you have extraordinary community organizations who are recognizing that people are suffering from heat, increasing heat. And they might be proposing things like shade solutions or better shelters at transit stations. The best design outcome is one that combines these two things. We can walk and chew gum, folks. This is not fancy. This is about aligning priorities and actually getting more money for this work when you zoom out than when you narrow the problem and you're advocating for just paying for the shelters versus looking for the value and the savings in the system that make this the natural and easy thing to do. And that's what you've heard me describe in all 4 of these stories. What we are doing now, and this is the work in progress example, is we are working with the state of Illinois through the Illinois Finance Authority. And I don't know if this work is going to work. We didn't know with Hoboken. We didn't know with the resilience bonds. We are constantly trying and seeing what is the thing we can do that can set a new precedent for how to deal with resilience in our infrastructure systems. In this case, we're paying attention to supply chain risk. So I want you all again now to think about a very long railway line. You've got plenty here in Florida. Whenever you have water on railways and roadways, everybody starts playing musical chairs. It costs people money. There's a very clear answer to that who loses money when we have more water and more frequently on roadways and railways. And you see it on budgets, and you see it in the public sector. States lose economic development value when you can't get agricultural products in or out in a timely way because the trains are stopped. What we're doing is pushing on this. And what I find so exciting about it is that there are no gray solutions. There's no gray, hard infrastructure solution to making thousands of miles, thousands of linear miles of roadway and railway resilient. But there are nature-based solutions. So now I want you to take that Hoboken bathtub and sponge and make it 1,000 times bigger and statewide so that we are able to create bathtubs and sponges to keep water off of critical supply chain links. When we do this right, the disinvested communities that are often most close to railway infrastructure are also the ones where we have a fighting chance to reduce their basement flooding, their mold, that kid's asthma exposure, that older person's emergency room visit. This is what we reach for in all our work. And what I find incredibly hopeful in a moment like now, where there's tons of uncertainty, is that it's still possible to do this work. This is in a lot of people's interests, and they're not as far apart as you would think. And so I'm incredibly optimistic about what we can do when we find that overlap, when we look for the ways to create value and savings and reduce suffering. So, what I think is really important is what the Bob Graham Center and the Gulf Scholars Program does, which is it brings it all together, right? We all need to do all of this. And when I started this work, it was absolutely not anything I was trained for. Almost everything that you're seeing on these slides is pure frustration and on-the-job experience. And so what I am thrilled about for all of you is that you are starting on a starting line way ahead of what I did. And so I want to really applaud and lift up something that drew me to this conversation and talking with Becca. And it's a simple summary of what the Center and the Scholars Program does, which is prepare students to lead with purpose in the places you all call home. This work only happens when you have deep place-based champions, when you have people who know what it's like to work with and on behalf of communities instead of on issues or problems. In my work, that's the difference between someone who is doing and someone who is describing the problem. So I'm going to go back to that money, shovels, and stories. And what I think are 4 lessons that we continue to learn as we do this work and try to push new projects forward. The first lesson is communications are everything. And I think we tend to treat it as a nice to have. I would say 90% of my job on a day-to-day basis is what I somewhat cheekily call English to English translation. This is when I talk to a water professional or a transportation professional or a public health professional about the same street tree. In one case, it's a stormwater project. In another case, it's a heat island project for public health measures. And in another case, it's a pedestrian safety project. Same tree. But being able to do the translation unlocks 3 colors of money instead of just 1. So when we talk about not having enough resources for the things we care about, some of this is genuinely having not enough resources, but some of it is not using our resources as effectively as we could. And communications, more than finance, is the unlock to being able to do that. A second lesson that I find myself having to learn this one over and over again is always make sure that you keep the future connected to the now. Especially when we're dealing with issues that are very long and deep and treated like a far future crisis. It's easy to forget that people are suffering with things now, and it's hard to add something that's going to happen 20 years from now when you can't think about tomorrow. So when you're thinking about something like sea level rise or climate change, what we do is we try to be very clear. No one eats an emissions reduction. And there are ways that you tie climate action to many, many other things. So we always try in our work, and I hope you heard it in all 4 of those stories, to make the future a natural extension of the things you need today. So Hoboken is safer from flooding in 50 years and 100 years, and you have parks that people want today. We can do these things. Again, this isn't hard, but when you describe a future problem, oftentimes it takes you away from doing something about the current problem. Okay. Third lesson. And these are hard fought. So they sound simple, but you've heard me share examples of the kinds of questions we ask. One of the things we try to do is avoid hitting people with information they can't use. And this is especially important, and here in Florida, around mega projects. So when I think about things like the Army Corps, that's doing big, enormous investments, a lot of times what happens is you go to communities and you say, there's this future problem, and here is a deeply technical thing, and I need you to come to a public meeting. Guys, this is my whole job, and I cannot stand public meetings. And it's because they completely miss reaching people where they're at. I have never found a technical problem that couldn't be well asked as a simple question. And what you're seeing on this slide is examples of the kinds of simple questions we reach for, like who's losing money and who's suffering, so that you keep the main thing the main thing. If you're working on coastal protection, what's the most important stuff? Who's in, who's out? Who's protected? And so a lot of times what we do with communities is we will empower them to ask the simple question and keep asking the same question until they get a satisfying answer. Not modeling scenarios, not packets of forecasts. Am I in or am I out? Are we safe or are we not? Is this going to work? Those simple questions are what have been the door opener for me from starting in architecture and walking into engineering, feeling more like an artist than an engineer, and then walking from that into policy, into finance, and now into this grab bag that I call a career. I want you all to have that confidence of being able to ask these questions and start with wherever your feet are and be able to reach your fingertips out to get to someone else who is able to move money and shovels. Last little note on our work and last lesson. Big things never happen alone. If you are really meaningfully trying to work on building what's next, on making sure we're all thriving now and into the long future, you gotta collaborate. And what does collaboration look like? It looks like this messy walk where you go from people's grab bags of needs to folks in government who are living in their narrow silos, to people who speak all the different layers of money, but don't necessarily speak government or speak community. What that looks like for us at Pre-Collective is like a relay race. We really try to set an ambitious and worthy finish line, and we never pretend we're running the whole race. We look for where are the baton passes, are there runners, how do you get that project to the finish line? And sometimes we don't even know who's running, like North Carolina, and we're astonished when they dart across a finish line. These are things that take a lot of endurance. And you shouldn't have to run them alone across your career. But what you want to be able to do is tell the story of where we're trying to go. So we don't just stop at the first leg and call it done and leave a lot of people behind. So I'm incredibly excited to have all of you in this community of place-based scholars, because it's what we need more of, and it's where I think all the opportunities are for deep, meaningful systems change. So thank you so much, Becca. Thank you to the Bob Graham Center for having me. And I'm more than happy to take questions from the audience. We will have mics roaming, so please raise your hand, and if you can talk into the mic for the online audience in the middle here. And if you could say your name, and if you're a student, your major, please.
Is this good?
Yeah?
Hi, my name is Everett. I'm an electrical engineering major.
Awesome.
I wanted to thank you once again for coming here. I found your work in Hoboken really inspiring.
Thank you.
I was wondering, with the uncertainty in federal funding for renewable energy projects, like we just saw the Nevada solar project being shut down,
Yeah.
Do you think local community-based financing solutions like the Green Bank of Montgomery County could be a step in or supplement for that missing federal source?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to acknowledge just how much uncertainty there is right now in federal funding. There are a lot of projects that have been derailed or stopped or thrown into chaos in different ways. It does take a minute to switch from something you were expecting to something else that's available, but I've seen a lot of progress in the Green Bank ecosystem, and I think the Hoboken example is really important because it was coming on the back of the financial crisis where a lot of cities were very cash strapped and deep scarcity mentality. Like, look in your wallet and see what you can afford. Well, it's a flood pump, not a $100 million park. And what they were able to do was use state resources. So that project was actually funded in part through EPA money that goes to states. So all states still have that lives with the states. And it revolves, so it's a revolving loan fund. And so the first $30 million for that project came from that loan fund. And because it was designed as a green and resilience project, they got almost 20% loan forgiveness. So they got the money at 80 cents on the dollar and were able to continuously add. I think it's really important to say that the only federal grant that came into that project was the $90th million from FEMA. So this stuff is possible. We don't have the stories in place for it because we're used to hearing it from the perspective of the funder, less from the perspective of the doer. So I love the folks in Hoboken because they did incredible work and they are also really good at telling the story in a way that helps others see the entry points, even when funding is uncertain. David first, and then over here.
Dr. Vajjhala, very interesting presentation. Thank you. My name is David Pravata. I'm a professor at Civil and Coastal Engineering right here. I'd like to get your opinion on the Montgomery County situation, and in particular, I'm so heartened that you recognize that housing is housing, and then absolutely there's nothing affordable or unaffordable about it. But how the most important thing you mentioned came at the end is you need to engage with that community to talk about a 4x100 relay when they haven't even got their spikes yet, right? So how do you, what is the process? You know, it looks like you're drawing your architecture, your engineering, and now this new policy career thing you're talking about. How do you get that level of engagement that translates that community from just engaging to being empowered to go forward? Thank you.
This is the $64 billion question. and I think there's a two-part answer. The first part is you need deep, committed local champions. And the team at the Montgomery County Green Bank is that. So I need to give a special shout out to their CEO, Steve Morrell, and their resilience director, Laura Mondragon. And they had these relationships. They had developers who were trying to get money, but just falling short of figuring out how to use loans, or doing it for energy projects, but not able to do it for water and resilience projects, because they weren't quite sure how to make it all work. And so what we did is they brought us in as partners, and they said, you guys seem to do something that we are reaching for. Can we figure this out? And it's our favorite kind of work, right? Because it's that pre-stuff, right? It's before the answer is well understood. So what we did is we listened. We brought in a set of housing developers they had relationships with, so it was a trusting space and a trusted space. And we listened. We listened to one of them describe the constant challenges of running around and dealing with repairs. So he couldn't ever make the roof solar ready. It was always just triage. And we asked a lot of questions of, what's blocking you? Is there anything that would make your life easier? Was another simple question. Like, what would make your life easier? What's becoming unaffordable? So again, you're hearing me ask these incredibly simple questions that actually are connected to very deep financial innovation. And so the answers to those questions are what led us to asking, do you guys have lines of credit? Like, why don't you have access to this? And it turned out it was because the way they manage properties is all in these separate little silos for liability reasons. So they don't get to look across and say, we have these 20 properties, it would be super cost effective if we could do something on 10 of the 20. So when we designed this financial instrument, we were solving for two problems. We were trying to make it look like a line of credit and a low interest loan, something where they would have certainty and access up front. And the second thing we were trying to do is make sure they could use it for their whole portfolio, not just whack-a-mole projects, which is the trap they were stuck in. And we only got there by listening. The financial innovation is real, but innovation is also getting things done. And that, I think, is way more important.
Thank you.
Over here, please.
My name is Koli Odutola, and I'm a senior lecturer at the Department of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures. I must confess that the metaphor that you used of the relay and giving the baton is so apt and is so amazing that it speaks to participatory methods of how to engineer and engage societies. So while I was thinking through this event today, and that metaphor came, and by some chance, you mentioned one of the problems in Gainesville, which is transportation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you count how many people, I'm about maybe 2 or 3 of us that use RTS.
Yeah.
There is a question of, I'm an old man. You probably will notice.
No.
But the anxiety that transportation system has caused,
Yeah.
you can't put a price on it.
Yeah.
And it looks as if there is no solution. We are in an impasse. So what I want to ask you, because I know that in places where you go, and this might be totally outside of your brief, is that if you were going to help this crowd, I know they're all car owners and scooter owners, but their friends probably use the RTS.
Yeah.
If you were going to help us design something tonight to create that relay, whereby there will be the slow runners, the fast runners, the chair leaders and stuff, and who would just clap for us because they're not involved in it.
Yeah.
What would you be suggesting to us? What assignment would you leave with us to say, when next you contact the Bob Graham Center, you want to find out what we who have come here, taking time out to listen to you, what do we want to do? Because you are a doer.
Yeah.
And everything you have said tonight is about doing something.
Yes.
So what are we going to do about the transportation system? And I can tell you what the problems are. The University of Florida gives a certain amount of money, and a president came and just withdrew this, cut down the subvention. And we've been in between that the RTS will rather maintain the high level of executives and cut back on the buses. So that's our problem, but it's much more than that. So my question is, if you were going to leave us with an assignment tonight, how do we start that at the starting block for solving or thinking through this problem? Thank you very much indeed.
I love this question. I have now fully exhausted the relay race metaphor because I am not a runner by any stretch of the imagination. I shouldn't, but I think I love that it resonated and that you all are ready to take batons. I find that change happens when there's a forcing event. And so you need to look for the forcing event. And some examples of what forces decision making are a disaster, like Hoboken, a budget crisis. So I would start looking for what is becoming unaffordable, because many transit systems right now are facing a fiscal cliff since COVID, of ridership, of maintenance requirements, of rising costs replacing infrastructure. So I spend a lot of time thinking about maintenance, because it's often a slow-moving crisis that is an opportunity for change. And so that would be my nudge to all of you, is to think about what's not working well for you, but also what is creating this scarcity mindset in planning for this system that is actually an opportunity. And so one of the things I listen for very hard in conversations across city departments is a time when someone says, ugh, if they would just. Because it means someone is blaming some other department for something that's very important to them. So it gives you a sense of where folks are getting stuck and where there's a potential forcing event. But I always look for that entry point to change, to start the relay race. And I suspect you will have ideas as a rider. One more question. All right, in the back, please.
Hello, my name is Tommy. We met earlier. I'm studying industrial and systems engineering. And my question was on your fourth slide on like the lessons learned. You included layered funds and project finance. And I was trying to kind of like understand the visual that you had up there of kind of like the organization of community needs and priorities and how that like fits into like the departments and agencies. And I was curious, like, how do you, like, what does that look like in terms of like collaboration between entities within a government, and like what role do you play in the implementation side of that, maybe, or like do you just set it up, and is it difficult to get them to work together?
Yes. Yes, it is often difficult to get folks to work together. There are real reasons why this stuff doesn't happen naturally, why our team at PRI is busy and able to do this high impact work. We have to do a lot of gentle walking of people out of their departmental silos or their sector silos. We also have to spend a lot of time with communities, really helping folks understand the difference between a need and a project. Needing housing is not the same thing as having housing to build. And so that gap between needs and projects is really this grab bag on the left-hand side of the slide. On the right-hand side of the slide, I had someone very, very early as I was finding myself walking into finance work give me some super helpful metaphors for how to think about finance. And one of them was, you really just want like lasagna-based finance. Like what people who move money want is to cut through something and all the layers are the same. You want lasagna, you don't want minestrone soup, where you put your spoon in, you get something different out with every bite. That's this graphic. We need to make projects function in a way that they're clear entry points and exits for the money. And it's in the interest of the investors for the project to actually get done. And that's the difference between policy programs that are designed to move money versus get money to the ground. And that was a very humbling thing for me being in federal government, was realizing how hard it was to get money to the ground. And so I think having all of you be able to ask questions like this is the key to making that better over the next 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years. It's a perfect note to end on.